Good morning, everybody. It's a bit quiet. Good morning. Morning, Mark. How are you?
Hi, Peter. All good?
So I went to the very first Bitcoin conference that was held in San Francisco, part of this collection, and everybody was in hoodies and trainers. And we've seen a growth of suits and ties and very handsome men in blazers. Are we still punk rock?
I think we always will be. I think that's part of what we've been trying to do. We've been trying to create our own ecosystem. And when you see the suits arriving, you can see that it's turning their own minds and they see where they want to go to. So for me, the more suits we see, the more we're doing the right job.
So treasuries have dominated the discussion and the landscape for Bitcoin now for a good couple of years. It kind of came in a little bit through Saylor, but prior to that, we started seeing people and companies adopting Bitcoin in the treasury. Why do you think we saw that?
So I think it comes down to what does a treasury do? When we look at these companies, the treasury function is there to try and make the most of the assets that they have and protect themselves against scenarios that they can't see coming, whether that's inflation, whether that's cost of capital, all of these elements. And again, they've seen what Bitcoin can do as an asset class. They can see that Bitcoin was standing in the way of the inflationary moves. It was standing in the way of what was happening with Fiat. And so it was an asset that they needed to have on their balance sheet. So if they were doing a good job, that was where they needed to go. So over time, I think what we've seen is the development of that. How do we utilize and give access to Bitcoin more broadly? And I think that's where the latest iteration of treasuries are giving users an access point to Bitcoin and other asset classes via that treasury system. So to me, it's a function of people understanding what Bitcoin can do and how they leverage its use for the best use of a company.
And I think everybody in this room is hoping that Fiat dies. Am I correct? I expected a little bit more enthusiasm for the death of Fiat. Although we are in Europe, we're a little bit communist here. But no, we do, and we expect that. And in markets where currencies die quite rapidly, those with access to foreign currencies have been able to short one currency, long another currency. I know people in Venezuela were able to make a lot of money doing the same in their own market. Is a corporate treasury essentially the same thing?
Effectively, yes. I mean, it started off as a risk management process. How do we figure out what risks we're trying to protect against, whether it's interest rates, whether it's FX, whether it's just market moves itself. But I think now we get into a world with huge dynamics and the influence of macroeconomic factors on Bitcoin price and on crypto prices as a whole. You know, the correlations we start to see change a whole lot. And so all of a sudden we can see that the dominant moves in markets are reflected in Bitcoin price, whether it be inflationary moves, whether it be macroeconomic events. And so again, that it needs to be a core part, and it's becoming the best hedge against inflation. It's also becoming a hedge against the dynamics that we see across most countries. So yeah, originally that's what it would have started off, and I think it was a more basic infrastructure, whereas now it's becoming much more kind of transparent what strategies work and what don't. And it's not a buy and hold anymore. It's how do you actively make use of that Bitcoin?
Yeah, so we saw that really with MicroStrategy. Like a lot of companies, they started with a treasury. Then they essentially became a treasury company as the amount of Bitcoin they held dwarfed the revenue from their software business. And from that, we've now seen people just create treasury companies on their own. There's a lot of them out there. There will be some winners and losers. What is required for a treasury company to be a success? Because there is criticism of some of the treasury companies just being really zombie companies who aren't actively doing anything. And so what will it require for a treasury company to be a successful company that's something that is actually worth investing in?
So there's a couple of factors for me. The first is understanding how they leverage their Bitcoin to generate a return and a meaningful return, because operating a treasury company itself, the expense cost to do that needs to be covered by something. So understanding how you leverage that Bitcoin to generate return so that you can actively, participate and benefit from it. That's the first piece. The second piece, though, is that how do you leverage that Bitcoin to expand your overall business, your exposure? how do you access capital markets? Can you borrow against that Bitcoin and leverage that to utilize whatever fiat you want to get access to, whatever other currencies you want to get access to? And until we get to the point that, larger banks understand that they can hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet and leverage that to expand and build on operations, I think that's where we'll truly see a big shift in those treasury companies actually starting to really utilize that for the positive benefit of the operating expense of the company, rather than just buy and hold and benefit from the price appreciation that's there.
Is Strategy a treasury company or is it a bank?
Depends who you ask on that.
I'm asking you.
Yeah. The way I would say it now, I'd still think it's a treasury company. I think in terms of being a bank, how do I see it? I see a bank as being a provider of leverage to the current fiat system that we have. They take $10 from me, they lend $100 out to somebody else. And so until we get to a point that we utilize the Bitcoin on a balance sheet like Strategy does to optimize and kind of lend out and provide, multiples of the capital that they've got for other resources, I think that's when it becomes a bank. So I don't know that we're quite there yet.
Okay, let me ask it differently. Does Strategy provide services that you would see in a traditional bank?
For a retail customer, for a user? I don't think they're there yet. No.
Not a retail customer.
No. Well, they provide an access point. They provide a hedge of sorts for kind of institutions who want to access Bitcoin in a way that they can't hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet. So they need to utilize Strategy to do that. So they're a tool in that way, but I don't know that they've reached bank level kind of distribution capabilities.
Okay, I'll tell you where I'm going with this. Are they morphing into a bank?
I think that's the end goal. I think if you would look at what their strategy internally would say is that's where they're trying to get to, and they can utilize what they've got on that balance sheet of Bitcoin to really expand themselves and provide a huge amount of leverage on top of that. I think there's still a few regulatory hurdles they'll have to get through, and how do they increase that distribution center a little bit better? That's where they're going to have a real challenge. They seem to have the accumulation and the corporate strategy part of that understood, but then how do they use that to distribute more broadly? I think that's where the challenge comes.
Because the reason I ask is the neobanks became the challenger banks for the high street banks.
Yeah.
Revolut is a great example in Europe. Excuse me. A great example in Europe. They were able to understand how customers were changing, how they wanted to access banking services. For Bitcoiners who natively understand Bitcoin, do you think we will see this new generation of Bitcoin native neobanks, which better understand the Bitcoin customer, better understand money, which we as a group in here would migrate towards?
It's a good question.
And if so, what do they need to be able to provide?
So if you look at what customers want now, instant accessibility 24/7, and be able to access that wherever they may be, whether they're here in the Netherlands, whether they're in the UK, whether they're in Ireland. So that's what we can provide. That's what Bitcoin gives the capabilities to. There's no borders to it. And I think that is the opening salvo for us to be able to expand crypto and Bitcoin in particular to allow that to happen. How do we access that? How do we make sure that people can do that? That's what Gemini is here to try and help people do and build. That is, we still get paid in fiat. And what's the quickest route to get that to Bitcoin? That's where we, as Gemini, want to be able to provide that so that you have your on-ramp. You don't need to get back out of that. It's in Bitcoin, and then you can use that from there. But I think, again, it comes into how do we make sure people could just get paid in Bitcoin? How could we utilize that framework more broadly so that you're straight into your Gemini account and it's just Bitcoin sitting there instead of having to go through that whole process of conversion? That's where I think the system needs to catch up with us. We shouldn't just be paid in pounds because that's how it should exist. How can we just get paid in Bitcoin and then remove that whole need for fiat to exist? If we can get to that point, and that requires some change, I think that's when we really start to see change happening.
Yeah, because probably similar to people in here, I hold a very small amount of Bitcoin, but I'd like to be able to do things with it. I'd like to be able to get a mortgage with it or borrow against it, maybe create some kind of future fund for my children. Now, with traditional banks, I can pretty much do that all with a single bank. Whereas in the world of Bitcoin, it's all a little bit disjointed. We have lending companies, we have treasury companies, we have exchanges. When do you think we will see this all converge into a single place?
So I think that's where we're trying to get to. Like the traditional world requires that we have to engage banks. And I think that's how it's existed for a long time. But if we look at where we'd like to get to, and in 100 years' time, what does Gemini want to be? We want to sit there with your all-access platform where you're getting paid into Bitcoin, it's sitting in your account, you can lend against it. Ultimately, you'd be able to leverage that to become a full service provider, and all in one place where your Bitcoin gets put to work for all the services that you need. And I think that's where we as a company like Gemini want to get to. We want to be that all in one place that doesn't need to use a bank anymore. You don't need to go into that world. And you can sit within our platform and do, whether you want to just stake your assets, whether you want to hold it, you want to borrow against it. Ultimately, that's where I think it's going. There will always be the need for the different providers and different jurisdictions and different services that people provide, but I see the banks are coming towards us to try and get access to those services, whereas I think we're already ahead of the curve on that. And it's taking time for the rest to catch up. We can be that one-stop, what was a bank, but will now be your Bitcoin wallet, and that's where you'd want to go to. So that's how I see it developing. You know, we all believe it in here. We just need the rest of them to understand and believe it as well.
Do we want the traditional banking sector to catch us up, or do we just want it to die?
Well, the traditional banking sector is going to start to move towards us. I think there's a necessity for them to be there. They exist for a reason. But I think ultimately their use case will disappear. I think that's where we'd like it to get to. There'll be no longer a need for them to leverage up all the fiat that they hold to provide a mortgage and everything else, because that will all be on chain. That will be outside of their understanding and their remit. And it will sit within us, with our own ecosystem within Bitcoin, to be able to provide better services, more transparent, and we can run it ourselves. We don't need banking regulation to do it. Right now, I think there's a hold on how fiat moves around the world, and banks have that. They've built their own network. We just have a competitive product here that's going to take it over eventually.
And so you said you see them coming towards us. Well, like, what signs are you seeing? What is happening out there?
So I think you see with the neobanks themselves are all starting to offer crypto. They understand that that's what those who are using neobanks, that's the next step they want to get into. I also see that most of those banks, they all have a head of crypto who all wants to talk about DLT technology and blockchain technology and how that can help them do what they do now. But I think most of those banks are understanding that, you know, the first use case was stable coins, and they see that that's something that's going to challenge what is a big revenue generator for them, which is cross-border payments. So that was the first piece they moved into. I think the second piece will be, and you can see some of the US banks now taking on Bitcoin, taking on ETH as collateral, being able to borrow against that. It's now within their risk appetite, but I think that's where they're now moving towards it. They have to understand custody, they have to understand the asset class themselves. But we've been in this space. We've been here for 10 years in Gemini. We know this better than they do. And so that's where ultimately we'll be able to show them the way, and they'll either follow or, as you say, they'll die in your preferences.
But with our industry, we're backed by the most pristine capital in the world. Does that give us a significant advantage over them? And do they even understand that? Because really, are they just trying to provide services that we're providing because they're losing out on customers? Or do they truly understand the collateral itself?
Most banks respond to clients' needs. Clients are looking for it. Clients want to get access to it. Clients are already buying Bitcoin and ETH on platforms like ourselves. So they had to adapt to be able to survive in that space because, again, clients will move where they're getting the services. I think they see ultimately what the benefits are. I don't know that they fully believe it in the same way that we do, but they can see that there is a want and a need, and they will follow that want and need.
So are we essentially living in a parallel banking world at the moment, where we're living in a Bitcoin world, where we think of Bitcoin as a collateral, the pristine capital that we trust and understand, whereas there's this traditional fiat world, which is backed by thin air and bullshit, and there's essentially two parallel worlds happening at the same time?
That's a pretty accurate view of it right now. I think there's the past and there's the future. And I think we see what Bitcoin can do as a future tool for financial freedom. It's certainly the one that's going to drive a lot of that innovation over the next 100 years. And I think, as Cameron and Tyler said yesterday, it is the money of the internet and where we're going. And that no longer needs fiat. It's all on chain. And that Web3 need is not for dollars and cents anymore. It's Bitcoin itself. So for me, we're existing in parallel, but I think one is moving towards the other, and I think we're the ones leading the way, and I think the existing system is trying to move towards where we are. Governments, central banks, they'll still find the need to have fiat and be able to control that, but I think ultimately over time, what we've created will be our own network, our own infrastructure, which doesn't need them to be a part of it.
So would it make the central bank obsolete?
Maybe the central banks become treasuries. Who knows? They start to leverage digital assets themselves, understand how that sits on their balance sheet and make sense of it. The US is creating their strategic reserve. Do we see the rest of the central banks, maybe across Europe, the UK, starting to do the same? And understanding that to be a properly functioning treasury, you've got to look at all assets that are there, and maybe that's the move that they take into leveraging Bitcoin to do the same thing the strategy companies are doing right now.
But do we want a lender of last resort in a Bitcoin world, or do we want people to understand the collateral and be responsible for their own decisions?
Well,
is the protocol the central bank?
I think that's where we want it to be, right? I think that's the future, and that's where it sits. And it doesn't need a central bank to be part of it. The central bank has their responsibilities for a country, and that's how they run it themselves. But the financial infrastructure that supports it, that should be with Bitcoin, and that's where it should sit.
So when I came into the world of Bitcoin, we were teaching people about self-sovereignty, taking control of your private keys, considering different forms of custody, from single sig wallets to cold storage. In this new kind of world of treasuries, we're handing over our sovereignty sometimes to other parties. Is that a maturing of the market we kind of have to accept for Bitcoin to be this collateral that is used globally?
You can't bring everybody to Bitcoin, and some people will only go so far as a treasury company, and maybe that's where their risk level sits. And so I think we have to support that in order to expand and grow Bitcoin's importance and dominance, there are different ways people are going to access that. So whether you manage your own wallet, whether you manage your wallet through Gemini, whether you manage your Bitcoin exposure through a digital asset treasury, that's always going to further and grow Bitcoin's dominance. And I think that's where we can't bring people to the well and let them understand and know what Bitcoin can do for them. But if this is their first step into it, then they start to understand, then they start to believe, then they'll start to move into their own Bitcoin wallet and take it from there. So I think it's all to do with risk appetite. It's all to do with education. It's all to do with expanding Bitcoin's footprint in that global financial system.
So treasuries themselves can be a gateway drug to self-sovereign Bitcoin?
I think we got to show people the path to get there, and I think treasuries can do that. And I think that's where we want to educate people. We want to show them the way. And if they take that first step, that gives them the appetite to know more and want to do more, I think that's only a benefit for us.
Interesting. Okay, so if we're moving into this world, it's still very important that we maintain a role for education and a role for elevating voices that fully understand the technical sides of Bitcoin, so we don't allow for a corporate takeover that leads to some changes to the protocol we don't like. How do we maintain that in a corporate world, that we don't let BlackRock make decisions?
Well, I think that's where the Bitcoin community is so strong. What we see in the corporate world is a lot of them, they may accumulate, they may store, they may custody, but I don't know that they're as active within the protocol as the Bitcoin community is. So I always think they'll be able to grow their share and they'll be able to sit on that, but I don't know that their views and their intentions would be to interrupt the protocol that's there. They're there to accumulate based on the instructions they get, but they're not taking those decisions, not moving those decisions in the same way that Bitcoin holders like yourself and myself really want to get involved in this. So I think it becomes an incentivization. Where is the incentive for them to become involved in something that they don't know as well as we do?
We're still in this precarious world of money printing. US debt, the US debt clock's over 38 trillion now. UK debt to GDP is over $1 trillion. Most of Europe is a basket case. It's obviously this growth in debts, it's not going to end, which means we do end up in a hyper-Bitcoinized world. Does that mean companies like Treasury and Gemini become the first institutions of this? And what does that mean?
I think that, that's why this Bitcoin was created. When we see what happened in 2008 and how people just, didn't take care of the finances that are there, and it's not controlled by us. I think we make that first mover advantage because we understand how to build and grow in this world, how we can service and how we can help people get into this financial ecosystem that will be the future. So I do think the treasury companies, I think the likes of Gemini, are showing the way of how people can cross that bridge, essentially, taking themselves out of that fiat world into the on-chain world and understanding that that is the future for them. And the future lies with them rather than the banking providers that they've got right now.
Amazing, thank you. I think we're done now, so round of applause, Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.